Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we are talking about what is obviously not only a relevant conversation right now with the the vaccine for COVID-19, but the truth is this topic about vaccinations, one of the most incredible things that medical science has given us over the past several hundred years, is relevant all the time. This is not the first time I've given this class on this topic. But the first couple times that I gave it, I was really talking about vaccines that are given to children for measles, mumps, rubella, polio, things like smallpox, things like that, which we absolutely are very, very important. But the reason I wanted to do a redo of this class is because right now there's been a resurgence of people pushing against the vaccine for COVID-19. And in addition to that, because of the importance of the vaccine itself, there's been a lot of new rabbinic literature from mainstream rabbis writing about whether or not the vaccine is recommended, whether or not it's required by Jewish law, a mitzvah, etc. So there's actually only one source in this entire class that I've used before in the past. And the reason for that is it's such an essential source that pretty much every rabbi today in 2021 writing about vaccines is just about going to reference back to that source. But what I want to do in this class, and there's obviously so much we can talk about vaccines, is there are two parts to the class. The first one is to kind of contextualize, to kind of put a face on those who are hesitant about taking the vaccine. And I think that there's a number of important things to say about that. So we'll get to that in a moment. And then the second half of the class is we'll look at three different opinions from mainstream Orthodox rabbis on whether or not the vaccine should be taken, whether we must take it. So we'll see their opinions inside. But before we read this first source, it's important to make a distinction between those who are called the anti-vaxxers and those who are hesitant to take the COVID-19 vaccine. And the truth is that people have been hesitant or pushed against vaccines for hundreds of years. And the reasons for that are varied, as we'll see in this short piece. And in fact, what's great about this short piece from The Atlantic is it lets us know that people who are hesitant or refuse to get the vaccine, it's not a monolith. They're not all wild, crazy conspiracy theorists. There are a number of people who take advantage of the anti-vaccine movement. And there are a lot of people today who are not part of that anti-vax movement. They're really just concerned about the nature of the vaccine. They don't see it as a big problem. And the truth is that the average person on the street who doesn't want to take the vaccine is not a monster. They might either really not think it's necessary, or they really are afraid of taking it and what it might do to them, what it might do to the people around them. Now, fortunately, and I'll say this right at the beginning, the COVID-19 vaccine is safe. It is absolutely safe. I actually took the first dose myself. Clergy and teachers are eligible this week as of March 1st in Milwaukee. So I took the first one. My arm was a little sore. And for those who say, oh, getting the vaccine makes you sick, it does not make you sick. The side effects that your body is acting as if you are sick because it's preparing to fight off an actual sickness. But the COVID-19 vaccine is safe. We will see that again in the opinions of the rabbis. But having said that, again, I want to go through this first piece. And Ken, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you to get you ready and introduce it. There's a very, very recent piece here from The Atlantic. I don't even know if it's in the print version of the monthly, but online. And again, what's so important about this is, even though we are going to conclude how important it is to take the vaccine, and we'll see how the rabbis rationalize and prove that, it's important that when there are people who are, again, refusing or hesitating to take the vaccine, is treating them all as one, either conspiracy theorist or fools is it's a big mistake. It doesn't validate them as people, and it's not going to help. And again, somebody who grew up in the days of polio, who saw how devastating and horrific it was, would have been much more willing to take a vaccine. And then the anti-vax movement really came to be, modern anti-vax movement, in a time when things like measles and mumps and rubella, nobody really saw it anymore until they started bringing it back. but the COVID-19 has been devastating to everyone. And a lot of, I can't give you numbers, no one knows, but a lot of anti-vaxxers have actually been more willing to take this vaccine. So some who are opposed to it's political. Again, this piece will really share, Ken, how everyone's coming from a different place. And regardless of, I don't think I'm really going to change so many minds with this class. If anybody's deeply against vaccines for any reason, all I would ask is think about it some more. Really think about where you're getting your information from. Are you comparing it to people you disagree with? And really, what are the consequences of you not getting or your children not getting it? But again, we have to respect, or not respect, we have to understand where people are coming from. So Ken, if you would take this short selection from this piece in The Atlantic, that again, it gives us a better sense of why people are opposed to the vaccine, please.
I call it vaccine dissent. Kolini Koltai, who studies online conspiracy theories at the University of Washington, told me. And it's way more complicated than being anti-vaccine. It goes from highly educated parents who are interested in holistic, naturalistic child rearing to conspiracy theorists who want to abolish vaccines entirely. I call it vaccine deliberation, said Giselle Colby-Smith, a professor at the University of North Carolina and the director of the UNC Center for Health Equity Research. For Black and Brown people, this is a time of watchful waiting. It is a skepticism of a system that has consistently demonstrated that their health is not a priority. It is not vaccine hesitancy among American Indians, but rather hesitancy and distrust regarding the entire government, said Margaret Morse, an associate professor at the University of British Columbia School of Nursing and an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes of North Dakota. After decades of distrust on top of centuries of genocide, now they appear and say, here, you have to take this. Let's not forget vaccine indifference. 2/3 of Republicans under 30 without a college degree said that they are not concerned at all about COVID-19 in their area, according to polling for Civics. The same percentage of this group said that they won't take the vaccine, making them the most vaccine-resistant cohort among all of those surveyed. Dissent, deliberation, distrust, indifferent. Vaccine hesitancy is not one thing, it's a portfolio, and we're going to need a portfolio of strategies to solve it.
And that's so important. Again, just saying, well, the science backs it up. Some people, they may be open to that, but a lot of people, it really doesn't matter. Again, is the vaccine safe? Yes. Is it better to take it than to not take it? Yes. But those answers only work if somebody's coming at it without all of this other stuff in the way. And a lot of these things are, again, it's not because people are uneducated. Sometimes it's been years of developing a negative relationship with the government. There are communities that actually, there are, particularly in minority communities, there are medical things that have been done to minority communities that were said it's for your good. Yeah, and they were actually, whether they were making so they couldn't have children or making them sick or testing drugs on them. And just because this happens to be a safe, effective, and necessary thing, they can't make that distinction. It's almost like the cry wolf thing, is the government keeps beating down these communities and mistreating them. And all of a sudden they need these communities to say, now it's time for you to get in line and listen to us. Of course they're not going to. And yes, politics and tribalism definitely play a part in this. But to say to someone, if you just looked at the science, obviously you'd see it safe. There's oftentimes a lot of layers that one has to get through before that even comes up to the fore. So if somebody has a family member, sending them an article from Johns Hopkins or CDC that's saying it's safe isn't going to do it for them if they wouldn't listen to the CDC or these other sources anyway, if they have a news source that they trust. So while that's not the main thrust of the class, this is just a call for all of us to really understand how complex it is and how, yes, this is a life or death issue. And the people that are choosing not to get the vaccine are putting their lives and the others at risk. But to just call them a bunch of idiotic murderers misses so much complexity, and it's not going to solve the problem. To actually recognize where these people are coming from. And it doesn't mean we have to validate them, be like, oh, I see how that conspiracy theory could be true. That's not the point, but to understand that these people probably 100% of them are not out to hurt others. They just deeply believe for one reason or another that they shouldn't or don't need to get the vaccine. And if we can recognize that's where they're coming from, then a conversation can really start. Unfortunately, we don't really have that luxury because life and death issues. However, that's the reality that we're in right now. And again, it's been affecting measles has come back, smallpox has come back. And what we'll see from these rabbis is them working within Jewish sources to put together an argument for why vaccines and just vaccines in general are necessary. And what we'll see is each of these rabbis are in the mainstream Orthodox world. They're not modern Orthodox post-scheme deciding rabbis, but they're writing to slightly different communities, from the more Orthodox, again, whatever that means to the right, to the more centrist Orthodox. And you can see based on that, their hesitancy of how extreme they will be, saying we really should get the vaccine, it's safe, versus you must get the vaccine. And if you don't, it's like you're standing idly by the blood of your brothers, are different spectrums on how obligatory it is to get a vaccine. So before we get into the three contemporary rabbis, it's so important to go back to this classic source. So Gloria and Leonard, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And this is in 1785, the end of the 18th century, during the smallpox pandemic, when it was, again, everyone saw it, how devastating, how deadly, how destructive, how much suffering there was. And then, thank God, there was a vaccine. We'll actually hear about the person who made the vaccine in a later tshuva, but the vaccine that he created was not as safe or advanced today. The people who say that the current COVID-19 vaccine hasn't really been tested, we don't know if it's safe. When you have 1 in a million people having a severe allergic reaction, and then they still live, that's a far cry from what it was with the first smallpox vaccines, where you actually had a number of people who died from the vaccine because it was very early science. But despite that, when weighing, do we take the vaccine with a reasonable, and for them, small risk might have been 1 in a 500 chance of death, or do we not take the vaccine and the chance of death might be 1 in 10? So Gloria, if you would take this from the 18th century, and there was a pamphlet, Ale Terufa, written by Abraham Nanzig in the 18th century in London, please.
A modest pamphlet. Now in God's compassion for his creatures, he has withdrawn his hand from this destructive disease somewhat, granting skill and understanding to the skilled physicians of our time, who have discovered an effective, almost risk-free treatment for this. Is it or is it not permissible for a Jew to use this treatment, which it appears involves exposure to a minor risk in order to obviate a great risk yet to come? It is as if we were treating an illness currently present, since all his days he suffers with worry that he will contract the disease as an adult, when it is more dangerous, as is well known. One who undergoes this treatment while still healthy, God will not consider it a sin. Rather, it is an act of eager religious devotion and reflects the commandment to be particularly careful of your well-being.
Pause there for a moment, Gloria, before you finish. This is the first time I gave this class, I brought a lot more classical sources from the Talmud and other rabbis and commentaries, but essentially this quote from Dvarim, which is the central one, and Rambam in his Mishnah Torah says it's a mitzvah to basically guard our health. Now that means being proactive in terms of eating healthy, exercise, even there's a midrash that says we should actually take medicines and do anything to protect our health, but also making sure that we don't put ourselves in risky situations. So doing cardio, running, etc., obviously there's a very slight risk that we could injure ourselves, our knees, etc., like that. But that risk is so minuscule to the amount of positive health benefits. Of course, we can run. Jumping out of an airplane for fun might not be permitted in Jewish law because, sure, it's a lot of fun, but it's also a pretty great risk. And the Torah says, protect yourself. That's not protecting yourself. And the rabbis, again, go to great length. Karate, it's obviously great, developing skills and camaraderie and defending yourself. But, is it, you might get broken bones. Is that permitted thing? And these are all the questions they ask, is how much can you risk your health for the benefit? And they even talk about if someone's drowning in a river, if I don't do anything, they will definitely drown. But if I jump in, there's a small chance I will drown too. So the risk for them is much greater than it is for me. So as long as I'm a decent swimmer, I should jump in. So you see this balancing act about the risk. Again, if the benefit of taking the risk is greater than the risk, then we should do it. Same with surgeries. If there's a surgery and if I don't take it, I will 100% die, or someone will 100% die. But if they do the surgery, 50% they may die. It might be permitted for them to do it. Maybe we won't command them to, but it's permitted. So those are the numbers the rabbis are dealing with. Now, again, that's the central thing of the commandment. Can we do something potentially risky, which the rabbis will say in a moment, there's nothing risky about the COVID-19 vaccine, but still, we are commanded to guard our health and to do anything to protect our lives and those around us. Now, talking about risk, now Gloria continue, and he's going to tell you what the risk of the smallpox vaccine was when it was introduced, please.
As for the death of 1 in 1,000, this is insufficient grounds to classify it as a danger.
So actually just read the next 4 words, or the 5 words.
For such a negligible risk.
We'll finish that sentence, but for him, 1 in 1,000, not allergic reaction, which is scary. And that's why when I got the vaccine, and any of you who did, they make you stay for about 15, 20 minutes to make sure there's no reaction. But that's 1 in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, million. And by the way, none of that in all of the studies, there have been no deaths attributed to the vaccine. All there has been is some of those allergic reactions have been scary, but no one's died from it. So there's virtually no risk whatever to get it. Here he's saying 1 in 1,000 chance of death is a negligible risk. And he said it's permitted to do so. And many accepted it. Some rabbis certainly disagreed with him, but this has become pretty mainstream. So if him 1 in 1,000, I don't know, I would take it if there was a 1 in 1,000 chance of death. But for him, it was fine. And he considered it at the time a negligible risk. And then go ahead, you finish it off, Gloria. Here, I'll make it a little bigger. Yeah. For such a negligible risk as this.
That we do not reject so great a benefit. Men of renown among the great scholars of Israel and the yeshiva of Rabbeinu Yitzhak Alfasi, the Rif, as in Fez in Barbary, and they did not prevent them from using this treatment. From this, we may infer that they considered it permissible.
That's just an interesting side point, is that I think I did a class on zoos and whether it's permitted to have a zoo. And there were a number of rabbis that wrote about going to zoos and they didn't write that it was forbidden. Therefore, the fact that they went and didn't say anything, it must be permitted. So that's the logic here. But the Rif is one of the probably 3 most important commentaries on the Talmud, if not number 2, or perhaps 1, depending on who you ask. So he's a big deal. So clearly, this was something which was so important to the life and health of people that even with such a significant risk, it was certainly permitted. Now, there's virtually no risk. Certainly, there's virtually no risk of death, and there is a very moderate risk of some reactions, and even that is relatively small. So with that in mind, now how are the rabbis going to approach it? So before we look at these 3 contemporary rabbis, and when I say contemporary, one of these sources was written in February, it came out a few weeks ago. Are there any questions just on the first sources? Excellent. Okay, so Leonard, Rav Asher Weiss, and again, all 3 of these sources, 2 of them are written by my known rabbis. One is from an institute that collectively puts out pieces of Torah. Rav Asher Weiss, who I've actually studied a number of his pieces with one of my best friends, he has connections with America, the Hasidic community, and he has actually been prolifically posting videos on YouTube in English. His English and Hebrew, he lives in Israel, both are impeccable. And he sits on like a throne in this white room as if he's, from heaven. That's the kind of world he's in, talking about how important it is to wear masks and take all necessary precautions for COVID. And he is respected quite widely within what we would call, and again, this is just arbitrary, the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi camp. He may not be the main posek rabbi there, but he has pretty universal acceptance in most of the Orthodox world. So this piece that he put out in English, again, the first chunk of it was going through all those classic sources that allow us to take risks, but also the mandate to protect ourselves. And I'm picking up here where he talks about the smallpox vaccine. So Leonard, the question of vaccinations, please.
The question of vaccinations was first raised 250 years ago when Dr. Edward Jenner introduced the smallpox vaccine. The Tiferes Yisrael, Avos 3, Boaz 1.
That's a commentary on the Mishnah that I didn't bring in, but he's mentioning it here.
Commented that, quote, the pious Dr. Jenner is counted among the Hasidic Umos HaOlam.
Or the Chasidei Umot HaOlam, the righteous of the nations of the world.
Chasidai Umos HaOlam, and will rightly receive his reward in the world to come for saving the lives of tens of thousands of people.
He says this non-Jewish doctor for creating this vaccine is literally a hero. He is true righteous, a tzaddik, a righteous person among the non-Jews, and he literally has a place in heaven for the number of lives that he has saved, which is incredible. Please.
Rab Abdallah Somach, in his Sefer Zivchei Tzaddik, YD 11641, notes that the Kaf HaChaim 1900 to 1940, YD Ibn 60, similarly notes, now the doctors are wiser. They administer vaccinations by means of an injection in children's arms, which prevents them from developing smallpox. Rabbi Chaim Palaji,
And you could just skip the parentheses to concurs.
concurs. Clearly, the position of the great poskim of the smallpox era was that a person should undergo vaccination despite the small risk of vaccine-associated death. Though there were people who died as a result of vaccination, they represented only a tiny minority.
Miuta de miuta, a little bit of a little bit.
And the danger to the wider public of contracting smallpox was far greater.
So two things that he's established so far, besides how the rabbis praised this medicine to save lives, is one, that Kaf HaChaim, a work written in the early 1900s, established that vaccines are much, much safer now. If it was permitted then when it was dangerous, now it's even safer. So all the more so it should be permitted. And again, and this is really important, I should have said this at the beginning, those parents who before even COVID-19 were opposed to vaccinations, they don't do it because they're evil monsters that want to hurt others. They do it because they're concerned for their children. And by the way, there are very rare, and I mean rare, like 1 in a million, if not 1 in 10 million cases where a vaccine may have a long-term allergic or some sort of effect on a child or even kill a person. That is tragic. That is not a reason to risk the lives of thousands of people. And again, the problem is it's not the one parent who is hesitant because their child might get sick. It's become a movement that's developed over decades where it spreads out and tens and hundreds and thousands of people do not take the vaccines. And unfortunately, it's based off misinformation or a mistaken understanding of logic, or people get caught in the Facebook trap where they have 100 friends that all think like them. That's why they're their friends. And one of them says, oh, my child got sick from this, therefore it's dangerous. What about the tens and hundreds and billions of other people that didn't get sick? You're basing medical advice and taking life or death decisions based on a Facebook post? That was my side rant. But here he's making it so clear that we absolutely value the infinite value of every life. But when it comes to protecting our whole world, those risks are insignificant, and we cannot ignore those greater risks, or we must take a small risk because of the far greater risk of not getting vaccinated. Please, where are we up to? And the danger to the wider public contracting smallpox is far greater. If this was true,
It's all the way down there.
Yeah.
it's under miuta de miuta, right under that. If this was true at that time.
If this was true at that time, then it is certainly true today, when modern vaccinations are considerably safer. Regarding the COVID-19 vaccines, pharmaceutical companies have conducted clinical studies of efficacy and safety with full transparency and external oversight. Over 80,000 people have participated in the placebo-controlled trials to date, and approximately half of the participants received the vaccine.
I'm just going to scroll down so it'll just adjust for a second. Okay. Near the top of the tens.
Of the tens of thousands
It's like,
who
where's
received
Waldo?
the vaccine, not one died as a result. Of those who received the placebo, 6 died during the course of the studies, compared to only 2 deaths in the vaccine group. And no link was found between their deaths and the vaccine. According to all medical experts, though, this vaccine has been developed and approved in record time. It is one of the most effective and safe vaccines that has ever been produced. One of the axioms of halacha is reliance upon scientific and medical data and the opinions of scientists and doctors in their fields of expertise. Halacha even guides us as to the protocol when experts disagree with one another, dictating that we follow the majority or most expert opinion. See Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah. We see that although the Gedolim,
Gedolim, literally like the great ones, like the greatest rabbis of any given generation.
although the Gedolim do sometimes question the positions taken by doctors, they nevertheless rely on their opinions when dealing with matters of possible pikuach nefesh.
I.e. a life or death situation.
Regardless, this discussion is not relevant to the case at hand. The efficacy and safety of the COVID-19 vaccine has been attested to by thousands of medical experts, as well as the governmental health agencies and authorities in many developed nations. There is no basis for concern about serious side effects or vaccine-associated deaths.
Pause there for a moment because I just want to, again, summarize, make sure we're all on the same page here. So first of all, there's a fascinating thing happening here with many early rabbinic opinions. I'm talking 10th, 11th, 12th century. Oftentimes when they were writing a question about a new reality, a new technology at the time, they didn't necessarily have, they couldn't go online and Google it to learn more about it. They would either use their own intuition, their own logic, or sometimes they would ask an expert, but they kind of had to go with their gut. And hopefully the rabbis understood what they were talking about. And with all respect, and I really mean with all respect, they didn't always understand what they were talking about. Here, not only is Rav Asher Weiss known for researching things and being a very shrewd and clever rabbi and very brilliant, but he also has the information at his details and facts at his fingertips. So he's weaving cold, hard facts that line up with Jewish law. So he's saying clearly with all these facts in line, based on previous rulings, you have a knockout punch that it's certainly permitted. And he mentions that there have been times in medical things where rabbis have disagreed, but that's not happening today. I'm not familiar with any major, certainly accepted or respected rabbi who's opposed the vaccine. The voices that are opposing it are not coming from expert sources. They're coming from either websites or Facebook posts that are either deliberately trying to misinform people, or think they're being sincere. They think they're doing the right thing, but again, their information is totally out of whack. But in the medical world and in the rabbinic world, there's no question. We don't need majority rules that this is kosher or it's not kosher. It's safe. End of discussion there. So he continues. Additionally, I've contended, and you can skip again the parentheses.
Additionally, I have contended, see Kovetz Zichron,
Oh, you can skip to that if we carefully.
that if we carefully follow the advice of the experts in their fields, even if they have erred, we will be divinely protected. This is the concept of Shomer Pesim Asim
Pesaim or Petaim is the
Hashem,
Israeli way.
that anybody who faithfully follows the way of the
And I'll put into context in a moment what he's saying.
anyone who
Faithfully follows the ways of the Torah.
the Torah and acts in accordance with the common practice, accustoms himself to the path that is commonly trod, will be protected by heaven, even if he thereby endangers himself.
So pause there for a moment. And again, this is getting into a bit of complicated, not complicated, but some theology that we can't really prove. But for example, driving a car is extremely dangerous, even if done safe. However, it's obviously the way that everybody gets around. And as long as people do their best to be safe and follow all the rules, then God will protect us, even though we're doing something that's inherently dangerous. Now, obviously, many people are still killed in car accidents, and they're generally accidents, even if people are being careful. Even though there's a lot of careless, but there's a general idea that if somebody is doing something incredibly dangerous and stupid, then God will not necessarily protect them. But if somebody's doing something incredibly dangerous and stupid, but everybody accepts that it's safe to do so, like again, exercise, running, Peloton, whatever it is like that, which I think are generally safe. But let's say it turns out, we find out later that cardio really is not for the human body. Running on your two legs is actually not safe. I don't think that's true. But let's say we find that humans should be swimming or using bicycles. That's what humans should be doing. So fine, in 50 years, but why were so many humans protected now from running? And the science, despite what science says in 50 years, because Hashem protects us. So let's say we're wrong about the coronavirus, or sorry, about the COVID-19 vaccine. Let's say it's more dangerous than we know right now. We believe that God will protect us. Now, again, that's no longer in scientific factual world. That's a theological belief that God will protect us when we're doing foolish things, as long as it's generally accepted that it's okay. But once it's clearly known that it's dumb and dangerous, God won't get your back. Smoking is really not smart. It's one of those dangerous things a person can do. God will not protect those who choose to do so when they know the dangers. With COVID-19 vaccine, everything is telling us it's safe. And the truth is, it is safe. And we'll probably find out that it's safe in 50 years from now, but God will still protect us because we're doing what makes sense and what is accepted in the general society. So that's a theological point, but it's important for people to hear it. So please continue. In this case,
the overwhelming majority of scientific researchers and medical experts are clearly of the view that the vaccine poses negligible risk of serious danger. This is especially true as the coronavirus pandemic is rapidly spreading in our communities and in the world, causing many deaths each day. In light of all of the above, it is certainly appropriate for each person to be vaccinated.
Pause there. The tshuva should have ended there. It goes on, and I'm not sure why. I don't know what, and the truth is, I could probably actually reach out to Rav Asher Weiss and ask him, with kavod, with honor and respect, why did he write the next line? I don't know if he wanted to end the tshuva here, and then someone over his shoulder said, your readers, the way the Haredi community has been responding, you gotta step back a little. And Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote some beautiful teshuvot where he talked about certain things that he said totally permitted, but don't do it anyways, or it's permitted, but maybe you shouldn't, like Thanksgiving. It's totally kosher, but people who are in the frum community shouldn't do it. Like, why couldn't you just say it's kosher, it's not kosher? Why did you need to add on this little addendum? So Rav Asher Weiss continues with the however.
However, I cannot rule that there is an obligation to be vaccinated. Every person is within his rights to refrain from doing so and to instead continue wearing a mask at all times and to practice social distancing. However, the more people who are vaccinated, the greater the feeling of safety and well-being will be, which will elevate the risk of infection. It therefore appears to me that it is halachically correct to be immunized with the corona vaccine.
So again, there's probably a lot of good reasons why he wrote this. Maybe the community, he knew if he had said it's a mitzvah and it's obligated, they would have totally ignored it. But by saying it's permitted to do so, even though there is no risk, but if you think there is, it's still permitted to do so. You're not breaking Jewish law by doing it. So he has to, if the goal is, being obligated, commanded to have a vaccine, and his community is way out here out of the frame, he needs to get them to here. There's no way he's going to get them here in this short a time when we have no time to waste. So maybe he was just trying to pull his community closer to the ultimate goal. But this is not the only tshuva I brought here. and you will see it's either the next one or the last one that explicitly responds to him. And I disagree with only that part of Rav Asher Weiss. Everything else is totally true, but I think he needed to go the next step. But I'm not a posek like him, which is why I brought other real poskim who I can rely on. And by the way, all three sources I brought here, these are, I've mentioned some in the past, these are the rabbis, other than my Rosh Yeshiva Rav Linzer, these are the other rabbis that I go to, at least in print. So the next rabbi, or before we go to that, any questions on Rav Asher Weiss? Yeah, Ken, I clicked on you and you can unmute, please.
Yeah, it seems to be contradictory. He says, however, the more people who are vaccinated, the greater the feeling of safety, and that will elevate the risk of infection.
Well,
So
Which
it's saying,
oh,
don't get vaccinated because then you won't
Yeah.
feel
Well,
safe.
It seems like he finished the tshuva, and then again there was something, whether it was another person or again he was thinking about how his community would respond to it. And again, also many teshuvot, about on Purim and things like that, you usually have time to think about halachic issues. There's no time here. These are coming out boom, boom, boom. You need these teshuvot to come out now. So he actually just published a work, Rav Asher Weiss, literally like, I don't even know how, it's like 200 pages. I don't even know how he wrote it in like a day or something like that. So it's possible that if you asked him in retrospect, would he edit it? Maybe he would say so. And again, I'm not Rav Asher Weiss. I don't know what he knows, and I don't know why he chose to do that. But it does seem like his tshuva was perfect. And then he added this on. And the language of, it'll be nice, people will feel more comfortable. That's not the point. The point is life or death, which he says so explicitly. It's about life or death. It's safe. It's not even, there's not even a risk. It's a no-brainer, but I can't say it's obligatory. People have free to do what they are. And by the way, we didn't even talk about, freedom of speech and everything like that. You can say whatever you want, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You don't have the freedom to risk the lives of others. So again, I'm not sure why he did it. And he is a help, please God, he should live for many years because I want him to publish volume 4 of his Teshuvot. But there's every chance that someone may call him on this and he might respond to it. This is an ever-changing thing. I said the last source here, I literally got in an email a few days ago, and I was like, well, that's perfect. I'll include that in the class from a respected source. So this next source here is another Israeli rabbi, and I use him quite regularly because he's not only an incredibly popular Orthodox rabbi, he's a very Zionist rabbi, which I love, but he's also prolific. He's written this like dozen-volume work on every area of Jewish law and constantly in an Israeli newspaper, bringing out new topics on everything from theology to philosophy to practical things. So there are few rabbis in Israel that are as widely written as Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, and he's a Rosh Yeshiva. He's a rock star. So someone did a question and answer, and I didn't bring the question, but the person said, can we get the vaccine? I've been hearing about people saying it's unsafe, and I have all this literature, and you can guess when this person said, I have all these articles that say it's not safe, you can guess where they're from. Rabbi, will you look at the articles for me? And I didn't bring it, but the rabbi says, no, I'm not going to read that. He says it respectfully, says, I'm not a medical expert. I can't tell if they're true or not, but he basically is like, I'm not going to waste my time with that junk. But to the question about taking the vaccine, he has a very powerful, beautiful answer. So Tamar, going to go ahead and unmute you. And if you would please take the source from Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, please.
Vaccination against the coronavirus. A, the Torah
Sorry, that's short for answer.
Oh, I see. The Torah instructs that in matters of medicine, one should act as recommended by the majority of doctors. And since a person is commanded to maintain his health, and doctors are the experts in this, it is a mitzvah to listen to them. Overall, this is how our sages explain the verse in the Torah, he shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. Exodus 21:19. From this, we learn the permission has been given to the physician to heal.
Just to pause there again, in the previous version of this class, there was I think that source in the Talmud or a Midrash that says Hashem Yerapeh, Hashem will heal. And the he in that verse seemingly as Hashem, but they drash on it, they interpret it that the he is actually humans is a doctor to it, because, and I think we talked in the class about insurance. If we completely rely on Hashem can do everything, which Hashem can, then why do we exercise? Why do we do anything? I can walk in the middle of the street with my eyes closed. Hashem will protect me. And Hashem absolutely says, no, you need to build a fence around your roof. You need to take care of your health. You need to have doctors. Hashem wants us to engage with the world and the rules that it plays by. And one of the rules are people get sick, people do die, but we also have medicine. We are blessed by God with this incredible intellect, and we develop medicines to push people forward, to save lives, make people healthier. Hashem is like, yay, as opposed to, what about me? That's not the way we approach it. So please, indeed.
Indeed, there may be doctors and specialists who are well acquainted with the field of medicine and whose opinion tends to oppose the vaccine. And since they are sure of this, it is right for them to act according to their professional position. It would be valuable if they delved into their research and attempted to prove their position. Perhaps they could benefit the entire world, just as at first the inventors of the vaccines were a minority and the majority of doctors opposed them. And in the end, they managed to prove their position. In any case, the ones who need to determine whether the claims of those who oppose the vaccines are convincing are the majority of experts in the field of medicine.
I want to pause here and talk about something very important in science. There's this word that's thrown around in science as skeptics. So, for example, Harry Houdini, who's a local boy, he thought that seances where people connect with the dead, they were a bunch of baloney. He was skeptical about that. So he went around to a bunch of seances and he just did good old fashioned science and common sense and proved that they were all untrue. He just did his due diligence. The problem is that's reasonable skepticism about something that's easily disprovable. The problem is people think that you should be skeptical of everything. And here's the thing. If I am skeptical unreasonably and I say that I will only take the vaccine if you can prove that there's absolutely 0% chance ever of any side effect whatsoever, that is a threshold that may never be met. And I had years ago a dear friend, someone I respect, I love, he was an anti-vaxxer. I don't know if you would identify that way, wouldn't get his children vaccinated. And when I talked to him, again, it was from a place of love and concern for his children. And we talked about it, and he brought me all of these sources. And we agreed on one important fact. Vaccines should be safe. And if there's a reasonable concern, like the new vaccines use a new kind of technology, mRNA, and I'm not an expert on how they work. It's new. And at the very beginning, people had concerns about it. But then through the reasonable trials, it was proven those concerns were unfounded and it was safe to take it. But then someone says it was only 80,000 people. How about 90,000? But here's the problem. You do 90,000 and then they say, what did they say, Tamar? They're 100,000. You say, fine, we did 100,000 no effects, 110,000. They're just, they refuse to accept everything. Their skepticism is blown out of proportion. So Rabbi Melamed is saying, look, if you have a legitimate concern, gesundheit, good for you, prove it. And if you prove it, it's only going to make it safer. And this is what I said to my friend. I agree, we should constantly be testing vaccines to make sure they're safer. But in the meantime, they're saving lives and waiting to meet your expectations of God's self coming down and saying it's okay. It's never going to happen. And in the meantime, people are going to die while we're waiting for your unreasonable expectations. That's not real skepticism. That's being absurd. So Rabbi Melamed says, if you have a legitimate concern, then absolutely bring it up. And if you can prove it, vaccines will be all the safer for it. But if you don't really have anything to say, I'm sorry, we have to save lives. We have a hand up. Maria, I am unmuting you. I guess you're just on audio, but yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So
Please.
There is something that kind of comes to mind.
Please.
I have an anthropology degree, but I've done forensics, bioengineering, et cetera, et cetera. But with every scientific journal that we have ever read in college and anyone I've ever read for fun, one of the major criticisms of certain experiments, and generally the mark of a good or bad experiment is if it's replicable. So a lot of these vaccine trials are easily replicated and they produce the same results. That is the scientific standard of the day.
Yeah.
Paradigms will shift eventually. This is still a very new virus, and viruses mutate. That's what they do constantly. That's why the flu vaccine is about 40% effective. So a lot of people, when they say that, it does unfortunately reflect a lot of, I know that science journals are usually really jargony, but they're worth reading because we probably won't have as many detractors, but I'm not sure we'll ever get there.
First of all, the fact that you read scientific journals for fun, despite the fact that you study that, is really cool. And you make a great point, which is, for example, I talked about the Facebook effect. Somebody makes a Facebook post, and it's someone who's a friend of yours, so they have general similar worldviews, and they make a claim. Maybe it's true, but test it out. For example, the whole thing with vaccines causing autism. That's a very scary claim to make. But then they tested it and they couldn't find it in any case. And in fact, there's probably a good reason why people associate vaccines with autism, which is that a lot of these vaccines are given at the same time in a child's life when autism can be diagnosed. But just because they happen at the same time doesn't mean they're connected. But your point is very well taken, which is, again, a little bit of common sense would go a long way. And by the way, if we did these studies and then we proved, oh, it's not safe, like you said, we change it. There was a point when I don't know if people actually thought cigarettes were safe, but let's say, fine, we didn't think cigarettes were a big threat, even though they absolutely were. We continued to study, they were, and we changed it. Just because science changes its mind doesn't mean it's bad. The whole point is it puts things out there that can be tested. And if you do the test and you're right, good. And if you do the test and you're wrong, you change what you're doing. That's the humility, the humbleness of science. But in the meantime, as Rabbi Melamed is going to say right now, the vast majority of the information we have shows that it does work and it is saving lives. So thank you for bringing up that point. Again, if I was a scientist, all my classes would be about science. And by the way, Scientific American, Discovery, American Scientist are great magazines for lay people who just want to learn about science, but don't have all the fancy language. So thank you for bringing that. So tomorrow, go ahead, Rabbi Melamed, who talks about ultimately going to the majority. Even if it's a chance we're slightly wrong, at the end of the day, we have to follow the best advice of the day, both halachically and scientifically, please.
Even if there are reliable doctors who believe that it is better not to receive the vaccine in keeping with halacha, one should act according to the majority. This foundation comes from the Torah. For in regard to a dispute in the Beit Din between the Dayanim, the judges, and Torah says, a case must be decided on the basis of the majority. Exodus 23:2. Our sages learned from this for all laws that we follow the majority. See Chulin 11a-b. Also in disputes between physicians, we go according to the majority. S.A.
He's just quoting himself, so you can continue to how much.
Okay. How much more so in this case, where the position of the majority is clear and solid. It is worth adding that this rule is the foundation for all of life, for one who does not trust the majority, nor trust the presumption of the validity of people who have not been proven to be lying, will be in doubt all his life. He will be unable to trust any kashrut certificate, lest the mashgiach, or the overseer, is dishonest. And even if he's honest, perhaps the business owner managed to deceive him. Rather, without a solid reason to judge otherwise, we go according to the majority, and the presumption of trustworthiness and are not apprehensive. In addition, if there are some who raise concerns, we go according to the majority of the experts who are familiar with the issue.
This is the danger of conspiracy theorists. As soon as you prove them wrong, they push off the date, they find another reason to dig deeper into their rabbit holes. And this is important. Scientists and rabbis, we are absolutely wrong. We can be wrong. Hopefully we're right most of the time. But what we as both a society and a halachic system have decided is we go according to the majority. And again, who's your majority, et cetera? Those are important questions. But right now it's a clear, solid majority of doctors, experts, and rabbis who say it's totally safe and we should absolutely get it. And if someone says, well, there's a chance of this, you can say, well, there's a chance of this all the way to your grave and the grave of everyone around you. And look, we can't live our lives that way. And again, it's so important. The 1 in a million person, the 1 in 10 million person that is killed by a vaccine is devastating for that person and their family. But the world cannot go living like that. At some point, we need to accept the experts. And that's why that first piece that I brought is so important, is when you have communities that have so much legitimate reason to distrust the experts, this is going to fall on deaf ears. But for a lot of people, you can't live your life that way. If you're stuck always looking for an excuse, you're always going to find one, and you're never ever going to be able to live in society. And again, right now, it's killing people. It's killing people. So Rabbi Melamed comes out much more strongly about it. He doesn't necessarily use the language of obligation, but that's why I'll take this final piece. The Eretz Chemda Institute, if you've come to my house before, and God willing, you all will again, on my shelf of Sfarim of Jewish books, there are these pretty purple books with yellow text. There's this institute in Israel, Eretz Chemda. They take on all of the contemporary scientific, difficult issues of the age, and they come out with these responses that are 3-4 pages, sometimes a half a page long, based on questions from all over the world, and they bring all their sources. That's what my rabbi said. Forget about the answers. Their sources are the real treasure mine. But you have this group of experts in both medical and Jewish law who write these incredible opinions, and they put them all online for free. They don't want you to pay for this. They want this knowledge to be universal. And they put out this incredible, they emailed it out to those who, subscribe to them. And they put out this opinion. So we'll conclude with this. And this one you would see, they even had the original Hebrew text. From this, we learn the obligation, and they use the word in Hebrew, shechovah, that it's obligated to receive vaccinations. And it is included in the fulfillment of you shall live by them, the laws of the Torah. You see how quickly they put this out. This is their translation. They had typos in there, and I think their first language is Hebrew anyways. You shall live by them is this law that allows us to break Shabbos for life and death situations, to do things that might be risky if it will save a life. There are a lot of things that we ideally wouldn't do. I wouldn't risk my life, but I would do something a little risky to prevent something more dangerous. As even Shabbat can be pushed off to get vaccinated. And that's a huge opinion there. If somebody has the only opportunity to get vaccinated is on Shabbat, they're ruling that one can do that if that's the only thing. It is especially an obligation in our time regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, which has already killed thousands and millions around the whole world, 500,000 and more in America, including our closest Jewish brethren, including Torah scholars and people of the highest religious dedication. This isn't a them and us. Everyone has felt this. Everyone. We should also stress that it is the obligation of every person to keep danger away from others. It's not just me protecting myself. It is my job to protect you. One who does not get vaccinated violates, al tamod damrecha, do not stand by while one's fellow's blood is being spilled. And the mitzvah to return that which one fellow has lost. There's a mitzvah returning lost property, and the rabbis interpret that not just as me returning your bag that you lost, but literally returning your health to you. It's a little bit of a stretch, but that's how it's interpreted. And there's a list. In fact, the last time I taught this class, there were literally 8 mitzvot that would apply to vaccines in general, all the more so now with COVID, potential loss of health. One should not argue that there's a concern for danger by receiving the vaccination because the vaccinations have been tested with all of the necessary trials and they were authorized as safe by the most senior medical agencies in the world. Since then, many millions of people have taken them and no danger has been observed. That's the biggest thing. Who are these medical experts? It doesn't matter. It's safe. They happen to be right. And they were right because they knew what they were doing. To the contrary, all of the findings prove that they are very effective in protecting from corona. This is the opinion of the prohibitively high majority of expert doctors in the world. So an insane supermajority of doctors say it's safe. The clear ruling of the Shulchan Aruch is that one is to listen to the doctors on matters of saving lives. There are even rulings in Jewish law on medical things like don't drink water that's been left out overnight. That's not really a danger anymore. The rabbis debate whether it is, but it's a medical thing that's not necessarily relevant today. But if you hold by it, it's not going to hurt you to not drink water that was left out overnight because a scorpion or snake may have put poison in it. It was relevant in ancient Jerusalem. Do you follow it today? It doesn't really matter. But there are certain Jewish laws about saving a baby's life, breaking Shabbos, that today the science of the rabbis then is no longer relevant today. And we can change Jewish law because of current medical knowledge, because it's life or death. We don't mess with Jewish law unless it's a matter of life or death. That which some claim, that they prefer not to be vaccinated, but to be careful not to be exposed to the virus through social distancing, is not a valid claim. So this would respond directly, whether intentionally, knowingly or not, to Rav Asher Weiss's piece. Distancing is not a valid claim, as it is not possible for a person to totally avoid such an infectious virus. Realize that almost all of the doctors have set forth that it is obligatory for all who can to be vaccinated, and the clear halakha is to follow them. Additionally, whoever refrains from being vaccinated with empty claims is liable to influence others to not vaccinate. The people or person who wrote this, I want to give them a hug. Not now, it's COVID, but I want to give them a hug. As we find in the Torah, our brothers melted away our heart. Heaven forbid, God forbid, and that's a pasuk in the Torah, and we do not know where such matters will lead. Just as this is the case with corona, and I love that they end with this, or this is one of their last lines, so too is it true for the rest of the vaccinations that the doctors and the health authorities set out as being recommended to be vaccinated, smallpox, MMR, everything like that. So even though not everyone is quite as strong as this piece, again, the sources it brings, the logic it brings, and the emotional and medical reality of it is so strong, refuting it is near impossible. And that's kind of the thrust here. Is if one actually sits down and deals with the sources, arguing that the vaccination is either forbidden, there's nothing for that. To say that it may not be obligated, you say Rav Asher says it's not obligated, but even then we saw that that's not a strong argument. But to argue against it with common sense based on Jewish sources, you don't have a leg to stand up. But as I said, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I don't know if I'm going to change minds. If anyone's listening to this and wants to respond, all I would say is think about where you're getting your sources from and what are the consequences of it. And you know what? I ask myself the same thing. When they first announced a brand new vaccine that had never existed in the world, my first thought wasn't, ooh, I'm going to go get it right now. My first was, I'm going to read a number of medical journals and watch the trials very carefully. And when early in some trials, they paused them because people were getting sick, that was scary. But that was following legitimate, evidence-based, peer-reviewed sources. And then it was clear that it was safe. And then I got it. And when it's safe for my children, God willing, my children will get it. So I went through all those emotional things, my own health, the health of my family, the health of my community, reading multiple sources so I could make a well-informed decision. But the people who are against it, what are you going through in your head? I believe that you absolutely are doing this because you're seriously concerned about harming yourself or others. I hope that's the only reason. But go through your due diligence. Think about what are the consequences of it and who are you listening to? And by the way, that doesn't mean that the anti-vaxxers need to completely ignore their friends and conservative sources. Listen to them, but look at someone else too. And you might just, amidst all of the noise, start to get a pretty clear picture that at the end of the day, with a little bit of common sense, this makes a lot of sense. And for those who are just looking for a rabbi to tell them whether it's permitted or not, here, 3 knockout punches, including one that says it's absolutely obligated. So again, I don't know if I changed any minds here, but at least for us here, to understand where a lot of anti-vaxxers coming from, we're not going to change their minds, but maybe that's part of the first thing to consider is maybe we can't change their mind depending on how we approach it. But for the rest of us, thank God, we are blessed with a halachic system that can respond to real dangers and can adjust and adapt and support real medical knowledge. And I think that's the most beautiful thing of all. So with that,